everybody. I think you're going to be able to see us, all three of our smiling faces here in just a moment. We are going to let everybody sort of trickle in. We saw that a handful of people were starting to join before we came on stage here. So we'll just give it another minute. But while we do that, we're just going to let you all engage with this poll that we created. We want to know, what is your current attribution model? And it's okay if you don't do attribution yet. So if you can, please go ahead and cast your vote as you join in. And then we'll get started in just a few minutes. Also, feel free, just from a bit of housekeeping, if you are interested in anything that OpenPrize has to offer, we want to thank them for being able to support this event and bringing Harjot and Laura together with me today to talk about this, well, very interesting topic for me personally around attribution. And so if you do have interest in what they do, you can click the button in the top right-hand corner of your screen. It's a little cut off, I see. It says, I want more info about OpenPrize, which is OpenPrize, and it'll just notify their team. You won't hear from them until after the event, of course, but you can signify a little bit of interest there. And we'll have a few more polls throughout the event as well. On your screen, you should see a chat panel, as well as a link to some docs and Q&A. And so if you can, please go ahead and use that chat to engage with us throughout this entire discussion. If you do have a question, please try to use that Q&A tab, because that will help us keep track of those questions a little bit more easily. However, I do have this fancy functionality in this platform that we use called Goldcast, where I can pin your questions if you happen to post it in chat. So looks like we're getting everybody coming in. So thank you so much for answering the poll. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So let me stop sharing that. We'll go ahead and close that poll for right now. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I am Mike Rizzo. I am the founder of the MoPros community, which of course stands for the Marketing Operations Professionals. And I am incredibly excited to talk a little bit about attribution, and an area that I'm particularly interested in discussing, and we will get into, is this idea of giving credit and not taking credit. And so we'll dive into that in just a little bit. As a reminder, for any of the attendees who are here who ask questions, who sort of engage with the chat, right, and ask some good questions, you will be automatically entered to win some wireless earbuds up to a $250 US dollar value. So that's courtesy of the OpenPrize team. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to Harjot to introduce himself, and then we'll go around the horn, and then we'll dive into the content. So Harjot.
Hi, everyone. My name is Harjot Singh. I am the head of marketing ops and digital at Zip, which is a intake to procure solution. And at Zip, I'm responsible for data, marketing technology, analytics, and the digital experience. I've been in marketing ops for almost 10 plus years, and I've built marketing ops functions at Hitachi, Uber for Business, and at LiveRamp in the past. And one of my personal passion per se is analyzing, or per se stalking, our customers and prospects. That's what I love to call, because just by stalking them, you unearth ton of data, ton of information. So that's what my passion is looking at customer journeys and building customer journeys. Over to you, Laura.
Awesome. Reminds me of college. We used to gently stalk people to get into the elevator at Long Beach State. Parking spot closest to there, and we would rock and drive around for 3 hours. Anyway, I digress. So my actual title is Solutions Consultant over at OpenPrize, and I'm responsible for helping move the sales cycle along, demoing our actual technology, building proof of concepts, and just being a technical resource for everybody there. My background, though, however, is in sales operations and digital marketing and advertising. So I feel pain kind of on both sides, right? Whether it's something in like a CRM field that we need to attribute to, or all the many things that marketing can produce as far as leads and attribution goes. So I'm a jack of all trades here. I'm excited to talk about it.
Well, we're excited that you were able to join us, and excited to learn from your experiences too, right? So I know you've got some things that you can kind of ask both myself and Harjot, but I'm looking forward to sort of getting the conversation started. So let's dive in. Laura, what do you think? Starting with maybe the 3Ws. What do you think?
Yeah. I wanted to, kind of Harjot, like get your kind of take on really what are the 3Ws? What do they stand for? And, in your opinion, in your professional opinion, how do you kind of define that set right there?
Sure. Yeah. I'll definitely get to 3Ws right away. But before I go into the 3Ws, I want to talk about one age-old saying in marketing. And I'm sure you all have heard about it, is marketing is all about delivering right message to the right people at the right time, right?
100%.
Right? And when I think about attribution, it is the measurement of delivering the right message to the right people at the right time. That's how I think about it. And if I had to quantify that into how I would get to that measurement, it's based on those 3Ws, which is who, what, and when. Is I go back to the connotation of our campaigns. I've lived my life in Marketo, and I know when Marketo did their training and they would teach us about smart campaigns, they taught us in the language of who, what, and when, right? So your smart list is who are you trying to target? What is the kind of email or content that you're trying to send to that person? And when do you want to send to this person? And if we take the same concept of campaign execution to measurement, it just stands so true. Is you want to measure who are the people who are engaging? Are they the right buyer persona? What are they engaging with? What channels, what content are they engaging with? Is that the content relevant to them? And when are they engaging with that content? Are they engaging within whatever your buying cycle is? And that's what you're trying to measure across. So just to reiterate, who is the people in your ICP or in your buyer persona? What is the content? Are they engaging with the right content? And are they engaging during that buying life cycle? So that's what you're essentially measuring for. And that in plain and simple terms is attribution for me.
That's awesome. It's funny too. It reminds me of just on the digital side, that's really that kind of like that final like demand marketing, right? I lived in Google AdWords, and we'd have keywords, and we know if people were visiting, and we know if they actually picked up the phone to call. But what we never could connect the dots to is where in the process did that whole buying funnel start? Like, was it marketing that originally piqued their interest? Did they download a white paper? Did they see us somewhere else? Did they attend an event? So it's really hard to stitch all of those pieces together from beginning to end and truly kind of define, right, where the credit should be given, right? Like not taken.
Yeah, I think that's all super valuable just to think about, the specifics of the win are what are interesting to me, right? Like I could have interpreted your win as, literally a day and an hour or a week, right? But I think the specificity of, hey, when you think about it in terms of attribution, when is your ICP engaging along the buyer journey, right? And along that buying cycle. We can get into all kinds of details in marketing ops, whether it's Marketo or Pardot or HubSpot, right? You can pull and analyze to your heart's content. And sometimes it's hard to pull that stuff back to the business value, right? And like what's influencing the pipeline, because I think all of it's interesting, right? When like, oh, I see that people are opening our emails more often at 8 a.m. or, 12 p.m. And like, great. That's great for your email stuff, right? But when you're thinking about tying it back to business value and accelerating the time to close or moving from, stage 1 to 2 and so forth, we need to be thinking about when are they engaging with what content along that buyer journey, and make sure that we pull that through to the leadership so that, as marketing ops professionals, we can go optimize or make recommendations on where to optimize additional campaigns in the future, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. a lot of the people that I talk to on a daily basis too, they don't know where to start, or they don't know really how to optimize the model that they're using. And like velocity, what you were just talking about, is a big one. Yeah, they're opening it more on a Monday, but how many days did it take after they opened it, to get that demo scheduled, or to get them to do some other action that was slightly more meaningful? And is it the same person, right? Or a lot of people have trouble. There's 10 different people on an opportunity. And tying that back to who is actually doing the most engaging activity, it can also be very difficult, right? When you're kind of siloed in looking at it just from one lens into one platform.
Yeah. I love the comment, by the way, that there's, many different people that are involved in an opportunity, right? And cross our fingers that the account team that's working the deal is associating those records to the deal, so we understand the associations, which is, an enablement factor that is difficult to master, I think, when you're looking for that feedback. But
no, I think that's why when we do this kind of attribution of who, when, and what, which is very, very basic, but I think you can scale it to as sophisticated manner as you want to. And the core things that you really need in that scenario is trying to determine the people who are engaging within that account, or essentially, in Salesforce terminology, contact roles on an opportunity, right? So that's what you're looking for. But we know the sales processes are not really well defined, and most of our opportunities might not have a contact role, or may have just one role based on a restriction that's set up by a sales op or by a revenue teams. But if we are able to look at holistically across contacts, holistically across leads that tie to that account by using our lead to account matching methodology, and if you have defined your buyer personas, they could be in leads, they could be in contacts. And if you can show engagement as part of that opportunity, I think then you can really clearly answer that question. You can answer that question in an aggregate manner too, as you can say, we closed 20 opportunities or 100 opportunities in this quarter. And out of those 100 opportunities, we saw that 50% of our opportunities had 100% of our buyer persona engaged. As simple as that. And that's meaningful enough to say that marketing is having influence, rather than saying first touch, last touch model, which are important in their own aspect too. But this gives a more holistic picture in my perspective.
Yeah. I think, well, Laura, I don't want to cut you off if you had anything.
No, you're not. I just agree.
I think that one of the things, if I recall from one of our earlier conversations, Harjot, was a bit of a, just like, if you could pull back the veil just a little bit on maybe past experience or where you're currently at. But I recall you sharing a little bit about your campaign hierarchy, and the way, like, and we're going to get a little tactical, which I think is good for our audience. People really like getting into the weeds on a lot of this stuff. But when you think specifically about Salesforce, which is a very common CRM for most of us, how do you structure your campaign hierarchy? And is there parent-child stuff happening? What's kind of going on there with your sort of attribution models and how you look at that stuff?
Sure. No, I think that's a very good point. And the reason that hierarchy or aggregation of data is important is when you present your analysis, or when you present marketing influence to your leadership, you want to present in a more concise and a mechanism that's understandable. And I'll give you an example. Let's say, let's take an example of this event itself, a webinar that we're doing. And for this, Mike and his team, Laura and her team, and personally myself, we took time to promote it across different channels. We sent up emails, we did LinkedIn posts, we did paid advertising to get registration. So there were so many channels. And now we have this event, and there will be a follow-up event activity, and we would see engagement all across. And when you start to do attribution, and you might see that somebody might convert in an opportunity just leading to a post-event email, and you would give all the credit to an email channel per se. But what you want to give credit per se is to this event, So that's why it becomes important to aggregate all those different activities in a hierarchical fashion in Salesforce. And I think campaign in Salesforce is a good way to set that up. All the different channels that you're promoting, all the different activities that you're doing that tie back to this bigger level program or campaign, it's important. So that's how I think about having a hierarchical structure, so that when you present the reporting, it's in a clear and concise way to say, this person that has led to influence on this opportunity engaged with this particular webinar. I think it makes it really simple rather than taking into account all the different channels.
But to that point, I mean, then if that is clear, you can then weight all the other different things that happened. Yeah. You still want to give some type of credit, right? But they don't all have to be equal. And it kind of takes you back to the fact that nothing's going to be equal unless the data as it stands is in a perfect state. So part of that all plays into this entire thought of, before we can even get to the fact that we want to build or create or adjust our attribution model, the data flowing in has to be accurate. There can't be duplicates. Are we assigning credits to multiple opportunities and different activities? That's why it's so huge to ensure that that foundation is created. And that's what I talk to like a lot of our prospects about as well. I don't think enough people know that their data might be in a broken state, but I don't think they realize how much it affects anything, whether it be attribution or territory management that they're trying to plan for. Any of these more complex initiatives that affect marketing and sales or just rev ups as a whole could be deeply affected by this. And just something to keep in mind, right? Because we can't get to any of those initiatives that you were even discussing, Harjot, unless there's a foundation that is correct.
Yeah. And I just remembered a very good anecdote from my previous company was we ran this huge conference in person. And as part of that conference, we had almost 50 different sessions, right? And when I created the attribution model, all these 50 different campaigns popped up. And it just became a data nightmare, because what I really wanted to show was the people who came to this one particular event, if they engaged or not.
Yeah.
I had to lead all this cleansing exercise of these 50 different campaigns that have been created for each of those sessions. And we need them. We need those events. We need those campaigns to report for future performance, that whether each of those sessions were successful or not. But they don't need to be part of your attribution. And that's what part of the campaign structure, campaign hierarchy, and data is so important from an attribution point of view, is what you want to include in attribution and what you don't want to.
Yeah. I mean, how did you even sift through that before, right? Was it just a huge manual process? Or
I could ask the same thing.
I know. That's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. But I think I didn't do anything fancy. They were part of the process, but I had access to Tableau, and Tableau gave me an easy option to exclude some of the campaigns just based on contains filters. And I'm sure you could do something similar in Excel, but I was just using Tableau to build my dashboards. It was easy to exclude them.
That makes sense.
Something.
I'm curious from either of you, actually, as it relates to sort of identifying what the campaign hierarchy and sort of like, call it naming conventions or sort of standards, right? Like for your organization, like where's that born out of? Like, where does that come from? Are the marketing ops people sort of like pushing on the leadership team to say like, hey, we need to organize it this way? Is it coming top down, or whatever sort of description you want to describe there, right? Is leadership saying, hey, I really need to be able to see it in this particular manner? And then like, you know, is it persona based? Is it just like, oh no, for every webinar, it's always this way. For every content piece, it's always this way. Like, is there any sense of standard that, you know, comes of that? And like sort of who's creating that standard?
You want to go first?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. I'm happy to take it. In terms of, I feel like from a leadership perspective, they don't care about your campaign naming convention. What they really care about is that I want to be running these high-level programs, and I wanted to be reported on them based on whatever the business objectives are. Whether those objectives are based on products, or whether those objectives are based on different solutions or different regions that you are running those campaigns into. And I think it's the job of marketing ops. And I feel like when I go into an organization, three key things to start off with is standardizing the channels, standardizing the statuses for each of those channels in terms of an example is what is an event, what are the different statuses for an event, what is a success for an event, and defining the naming convention of them, I think are very, very key for me. I feel they are the founding blocks for anything that you do and anything you report on. And from a naming convention, I've loved this hack in terms of a lot of people would give you a recommendation on starting off with with year, month, including a geo, including a product if you're trying to do a product or a solution-based scoring, including any region, and then including the campaign. What I also love to do in the naming convention is I've always been a Marketo customer, and in Marketo there is a unique code for each campaign. It's found in the URL, and I plug that in the campaign name. And it makes your naming convention unique for each campaign, and it's so easy to search. Like those 4 unique codes are unique for all of the campaigns. But
That's a good hack.
I just feel like it's just such a basic foundation where naming convention is so important, and where tools like Marketo really don't allow you to search if you don't have the right naming convention or do anything else. So naming convention is the key for me per se.
Yeah, I think part of that extends into OpenPrize. But what's interesting is that as a company, we should be drinking our own champagne, right? So we have taken it a step further. We view right now, we've tested multiple models within our environment, and what's helpful to us is that utilizing our own technology, it's slightly less of a worry about the naming convention and searching, because we can now pull in timestamps, pull in keywords. We can pull information from Marketo and Salesforce. We pull in some G2 info. We pull in Google Analytics info. And our platform is able to automate and do all the calculations and assignments that way. So it takes a little bit of the weight off, right? And a lot of it does first come with like tagging, right? And still like reflecting in our system, like what those are, similar to how you might do in Marketo. But once the data's in there, it's easy to aggregate it any way we need. And for us personally, we've started to put a little more emphasis on last touch. But to us, last touch is right before the opportunity was actually created. But that doesn't mean that nothing else counts. It's just we just weight that right a little bit more. So that's where flexibility comes in. Because with us, we've had time to be in there and get creative and go crazy with it. But at the same time, first, last, multi-touch, a lot of these things that anybody's doing, we have very prescriptive models that we can just, set someone off to the races in, and, if they want to tweak it, they can. But yeah, for us personally, we tend to use our own platform, and we have some best practices and cool stuff we could chat with anybody about if they want to hear.
Yeah, very cool. I think it's a good time. So we do have another poll question for the audience. And so I'm gonna go ahead and open that right now. And that is, do you currently use any products to help with your attribution model? Because I think like one of the messages that's kind of coming through right now is that attribution is hard, right? And we need to figure out like, I mean, everything down to the basics of like naming conventions so that it's easy to search through your marketing automation platform, whether that's Marketo or HubSpot or what have you, down to like, okay, we're not that sophisticated. We don't have an advanced naming convention system. And, we actually have a tool that sort of enables us to sort of forego creating some sort of standards there, which sounds like, an OpenPrize can help with, et cetera. And so I think, for the audience's sake, it's good to figure out how many of you are actually utilizing a product to help with attribution. So it looks like, wow, like 37% are saying yes, they have something, 25 are saying nothing, and a few are saying that they're exploring options. And I love that somebody said, I don't know where to begin, because, or at least a couple people, because it's crazy hard, right? Like, I don't even know where to start with this stuff. But I do, so we'll go ahead and stop sharing, and we'll let the poll linger on for just a little bit longer here. I think, getting into the discussion around, attribution and credit. So I'm particularly passionate about this topic, and the topic specifically being credit. There's been a number of threads over time on LinkedIn, even in MoPros in the forums and in Slack. Credit has been considered a 4-letter word, like a bad word, right? Like, hey, we don't talk about credit when it comes to attribution. And I want to take a hard and fast stance right now and say it's okay to give credit. It is not about taking credit, right? So your team that you enable, whether you're a RevOps, marketing ops, sales ops person, should be looking at how do we give credit where credit is due, and how do we not sort of beat our chests and say we're the greatest and take credit. It's about alignment, and credit doesn't have to be a 4-letter word, right? And so, and I'll also just sort of like end my little rant with, when you look at the end of movies, right? And we're watching the movie and it's ending and there's a bunch of stuff coming up on screen. What are those called?
Credits.
Those are called credits, right? So all of those
Everybody's
everybody's getting credit for bringing that amazing movie to life, right? And so, I want the audience to walk away with this idea that credit isn't a bad thing. You just need to figure out how to give it where it's due. But would love to hear sort of your thoughts, both of you. So maybe Laura, or what do you think about sort of giving credit versus taking credit, and sort of breaking down some of the walls between teams?
Yeah, I think it's a great analogy. And I think industry as a whole, especially over the past 5 years, is almost starting to mold that way. You see this term, we talk about it, RevOps, right? Like, there's still sales and marketing on a lot of teams, right? It was like sometimes they're friends and sometimes it's sales versus marketing. And I've been on both sides. But the whole idea that, you're partnering, right? And partnering with each other, and hopefully some form of or multiple forms of technology to definitely give credit, because you can only be smarter, right? You want to work smarter, not harder. And being able to attribute and give credit where it actually is happening out there is going to give you a better 360 view of what's going on to make better decisions moving forward as to where you should attribute campaigns or, sales processes, like what is working on both sides, so that you can continue to replicate that and continue to be successful and grow on those decisions, right? Taking credit, you're kind of just like, throwing darts without a bullseye and hoping you're going to hit it. You're like my cat back there, maybe one day. He loves to be in the show and take credit for being probably the cutest thing on this webinar, but
you're right.
Is that really true? It's really about the information. So yeah, I think that it definitely is a whole, and having platforms like OpenPrize and even other platforms that we complement that are, visually like a Tableau or BI tool, that's where we can partner, just like sales and marketing can, to really help everybody, create that full vision of what's actually happening, not what you think is happening. So.
Like that. No, well said, Laura. And I feel the same way in terms of how do we turn credit into credibility, right?
Yeah.
Think about it is that taking credit and the way we can make it credible information for both sales and marketing team. And when I've used marketing attribution platforms or models in my life, what happens is any model that you look at, first touch, last touch, or even for multi-touch models, these tools are based on some key milestones that they look at. Like your MQ lead creation is a milestone, your MQL could be a milestone, your opportunity creation is a milestone, and your closed won stage is a milestone. And all these tools, when you look at it, they would give credit based on what was the last thing that happened before a milestone was achieved, right? What was the last campaign? What was the last channel that drove that engagement before an opportunity was created? And in my case, I came across an example where we had this big event and we had a follow-up email from that event. And the person clicked on the follow-up email And after the follow-up email happened and they clicked on it, an opportunity was open, right? So the whole credit went to the email. Um, uh, is that probably right? Maybe to some extent, but there was a big event where there were meetings that were happening with sales, with the team leadership, company leadership, which likely had much more credit. And that's where we go into the weightage aspect of it. It becomes very tricky. It's not easy. So that's why looking at a holistic journey is much more important. Once you have defined your buyer personas, who those key buyers are, what are they engaging with, along that buyer journey, when your opportunity was open, before your opportunity was open, until the opportunity is closed, look at that activity. What are they engaging with? What are the channels that are driving those activities? And that's how you'll be able to give answer and change that terminology of taking credit, where just that one last activity is taking the whole credit, but rather giving credit to all the activities that are happening. That's how we can change this massive amount of data into credible information.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just a puzzle, right? You think of it as all these pieces. You can identify what's working. If a few aren't, take a few pieces out, plug a few new pieces in. It's still going to be a complete puzzle. And whether it eventually builds out and gets used to the full thing, like it will. But that's another thing. It definitely takes time, right? And you need that information to, right, help you make intelligent decisions to complete that puzzle. And you can get there. You just need tools to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's all very credible advice. I really like this idea of, I think everybody knows, I'm sort of unashamed to say, like, we need to break down, like we all say it, everybody says it in the community, right? Break down the silos, align teams. We see RevOps as a category emerging to try to do some of that. And I'm not ashamed to say that we need a marketing operations certification that's agnostic of any technology provider. Like, we do need tools to enable these sort of functions, right? To be able to give credit where credit is due and measure it in a way that's not as complicated as doing a lot of really crazy pivot table analysis. But we also need to figure out ways to enable the organization, our community of professionals to go into the organization and have these conversations about, aligning. Like, when should somebody get, credit, or not somebody, but some program, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious, just before we kind of, I know we have other things to talk about, and some, maybe even some advice on getting started, but I am curious, Harjot, how have you initiated sort of alignment conversations within your organization? You've got this tool, whether it's OpenPrize or what have you, right? And Tableau to visualize data. You've got these things in place, which is a win. But then how do you start that conversation, and who's involved, right? And what are some of the sort of guidelines that you might be able to have around that?
Yeah, I think the conversations, these conversations are very important. And I've seen most of these conversations driven from a leadership perspective. Your revenue team, your sales team sets up some goals that they want to, that they have to achieve the revenue for the quarter or for the year. You have those conversations then trickle down to marketing. What are marketing goals? And we start to build our plans and then start to execute against it. That's the journey that we take. And then the campaigns are executed, and then we start to report on what's happening and what's working, what's not working. And that's where all the data that comes from execution comes in handy. And the way we can start to create alignment is just looking at all the data. But before you get too deep, I would say pick up some opportunities that have closed in that month or in that quarter, and do a handful analysis in terms of what's working, what's not working, and try to expand that, what's the model that you built for one opportunity, and expand that across all the opportunities. And in my personal case, what I've done that was I aligned everything. I didn't had any tool to begin with. I just had Marketo and Salesforce, and I aligned everything on a campaign level, right? and I had a tool that would help me do lead to account matching. That was another tool. But aligning everything on a campaign level, I had all the campaign member history in Salesforce, who's responded, who's not responded. I have all the opportunities that have closed for the month, what has not closed. So I have all that information, and I would just do joins on those two in a pivot table or an Excel, looking at all the campaign membership, all the opportunities. The only identifier that you need is account, right? You want to tie everything back to an account level. I'm sure tools like OpenPrice can help you do that analysis easier, but I was able to just do that once I had that connection, I could look at all the activity within that opportunity. And what was really surprising at that point was, and the things that really helped us to get alignment was, we really saw that there were like 30 to 40% of key accounts where marketing really did not engage at all, right? And that's a clear, open eyesight. It's just a clear eye opener for all of us that these are those accounts that we need to double down on and start engaging, right? So it was just a very simple analysis, not doing any attribution, not doing anything else, but looking at engagement across those opportunities and where we really missed and where we really made a mark, and double down on what was really working, because that's what really attribution is. Just looking at what's working and try to see what gap was there. And we were not ashamed to say that to our leadership, that we had these 30% of our accounts that we didn't really touch. And that was an opportunity for us to work along and really build that alignment between marketing and sales and get that credibility. Yeah.
That's good. You got to start somewhere, right? Just take a deep breath and just take a small piece, right? And like we'll talk clients the same, even without OpenPrice. It's just take a look back, whether it was a quarter or a year, whatever you want to do, right? Some small wins is what actually did work, like very similar to what you did. And it's a good starting point, right? Whether somebody wants to be prescribed what to do next, or at least start somewhere. That's the beauty of attribution, is that you can continue to evolve it, continue to optimize it, and continue to grow as your company scales. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and incredibly refreshing to hear that your organization, whether you led the effort or not, and if you did, kudos to you even more, Harjot. But refreshing to hear that as a marketing ops professional, you're able to step back and say, hey, we didn't engage with these. And hopefully some of them were actually closed won opportunities and not closed loss opportunities. And so you're actually saying, as a matter of fact, like, we were able to close these deals. However, there's a chance that if we did get involved, maybe it would have accelerated the time to close.
Yeah. Exactly.
Maybe not. We got to experiment with that, right? And so I think it's refreshing to, when you discover that data. I've known organizations in the past. I've heard rumor, I should say. I haven't been at those organizations, thankfully, but I've heard rumor that people will try to bury that, right? Oh, like,
for sure.
Let's just focus on what's working for marketing, right? And again, getting back to this message of giving credit, not taking it. That also means that you need to take ownership of, when there hasn't been an involvement on the team that you serve, whether that's marketing or RevOps or what have you.
Yeah. Sales isn't free from doing the same kind of thing, right? Ignore kind of what's going on the marketing side, but say the only reason they closed it was because of that. So we've all been there.
And to be fair, I've definitely had conversations with sales leaders that throughout my career that, there will be times where a salesperson just crushed it. I mean, really busted their behind to try to make that deal happen. And then the attribution model kind of comes into play, and it's like, oh, and like this webinar is what ended up being the deal. So like, congratulations, marketing, you closed the biggest deal of the year. And it was like, I've been talking to that one person, if I'm the sales rep, right? Like, I've been talking to that one person for the last however many months. They just finally converted. So
I know. Flailing in the background.
Yeah, they're like, whoa. Right? So, we all need to realize that a lot of work goes into all of this, right? Kelly asked a really good question. So I'm going to go ahead and share this right now. because I think it's fitting for this conversation we're having right at this moment. So do you think there is a time element to attribution relating to leads that are in the system for a while, where there may be some engagement in the beginning and then drops off for a while before re-engagement? Is it best practice to apply credit to those early interactions, even though they aren't aligned with what caused them to convert? Would love to hear your thoughts.
This is such an awesome conversation. And this goes back to the concept of when we looked at 3Ws, one aspect was when, right? And what is the time frame that you should consider when you're looking at the engagement? And what my recommendation is to have a weighting scale. And when I say weighting scale, I'll give you an example where for us, our buying cycle was 6 months. So we would look at 6 months before an opportunity was opened and up till opportunity was closed. That was our time frame to look at the activity, right? And that became a credible activity. But what I also had was a weighting scale that I wanted to see what would happen if I would change the scale from 6 months to 1 year, right? And is there an increase in marketing engagement? And behold, it was true that we saw a lot more digital activity when we increased that scale to a year timeframe. So I would recommend to have a weighting scale to determine if there were some key digital channels that really come into play early in the engagement. So it's important to showcase that. And it's about giving credit to those digital channels that really play a big part early in the engagement. So that's how I would approach that.
Yeah, 100% agree. And especially taking into consideration like your own, buying cycle and buying process. Like, sometimes does it take a year? Does it take a year and a half? Is it more of a 3-month thing? So depending upon even looking back on average, right, like ops to close, then you can kind of help formulate that weighting exercise that Harjot's talking about and even apply it there. So I think 100% agree with him. That's like number one, giving credit, because you never know what happened a while back and something could have triggered action to eventually close, even if it was a year ago.
I'm going to go ahead and share some of the chat questions that are coming in now. So Raymond, you've got 2 questions. How do you measure engagement, Harjot? What tools were collecting engagement? And did you run into objections from sales about influences versus source? So they're sort of back to back. So we'll start with the first one that I'm sharing on screen right now. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so my tools of measuring engagement were primarily, I looked at all the website data. I looked at all the Marketo and Salesforce campaigns, and essentially all the marketing activity that was happening that was in place. And I used an ABM tool that really helped me connect all this activity into one. And in my case, personally, I use Demandbase, and that's where all the activity was in place. And I'm sure tools like OpenPrice can also help you collate all that data. And I just actually exported the whole activity, which was a combination of Marketo campaigns, website data at an account level. I just exported into an Excel or a CSV, pushed it into a Tableau, brought my opportunity data, and did all the analysis. And from an attribution point of view, I still had Visible for measuring online touch points and campaign attribution. So those were my key tools. So if I had to name the tools, we had Marketo, Salesforce, Demandbase, OpenPrice, Visible, and Lean Data. So those were our tools. Lean Data helped us along with OpenPrice for lead to account matching.
Fantastic. This next question here from Raymond as well was, did you run into objections from sales about influences versus source?
We actually got much more appreciation on influence rather than source, because when we were looking at source, it was really not a credible source of information, because the way we were looking at source was we had lead come in, the lead would convert, would get tied to an opportunity, and the opportunity was closed. And sometimes the person who was on an opportunity might have came in a couple of years ago, and that was really not credible. Sales would say, we are just looking at an activity that's happening in 6 months, and really did not make sense when we were doing renewals or renewals or cross-sells or upsells. Cross-sells and upsells, if we had relied on lead source, they really did not agree on it. And influence was actually better appreciated because we could see marketing activity across buyer personas, especially for cross-sell and upsell. So influence was actually better accepted than source.
That makes sense. And to answer just from my sort of background for what it's worth, which I don't think is as valuable as it once probably was, but and it's a bit of a shameless plug, so I apologize, but I created a marketing ops playbook. It's available on the mopros.com as a template. But in that playbook is where we would actually sit down. So myself and the demand gen marketer and the sales ops leader, or just the head of sales, really at the time, it was an early stage startup. We would sit down and we would define a lot of those rules in terms of sort of influence versus source, and sort of going back to that question around time-based decay, and sort of like, when do you sort of realign source of a deal based on sort of the next engagement point? And we all just sat down and agreed on it, and we wrote it down in a document, and we called it the Marketing Ops Playbook. And we sort of lived by that document. And if we needed to update it, we would get together, we would talk about it, and we would update it. And so for what it's worth, if you don't have a version of your own sort of marketing ops playbook inside of your org, go spin one up. Feel free to check out the template, but spin one up and have those conversations and get them on paper or, digital paper and get aligned in that way. All right. So we've got just about 12 minutes left here. So I'm going to go ahead and look at some of these pinned questions that we had in the chat. So I think this is a good one for you, Laura. I mean, for both of you, but, in general, do you feel people get a little too in the weeds with attribution? Analysis paralysis. Like, how do you combat that?
Yeah.
I think this does. I do want to caveat that, like, I think this does get to the point we want to leave you all with today, which is sort of like how to get started, right? And so, avoiding analysis paralysis is, I think, a good place to start.
Yeah, no, I agree, right? And it's just like, first off, it always starts with a conversation. Get aligned with your teams, have a conversation about what's important. And I think that Harjot's example earlier, just again, like, start with some small wins and build from there. In addition to, if you know specifically there are things that are very important to you, by all means add them in. But when we talk about, there's so many things, right? There's like velocity, there's this touch, that touch, this touch, and you don't know where to even start. Take a step back, think about what's important to your business. Is it like, is it a few? For me, I think obviously attributing and helping to give credit to the actions of either the RevOps and sales combined, or like RevOps or marketing and sales combined, like the campaigns and stuff like that is one huge thing. But always, remember to focus on what's closing and trying to find out why it's closing. And just go with those two simple things. Like, what are we sending out that are getting people engaged to start? What's closing? Why is it closing? Let's start there. And then you can start to trickle in and layer on some additional weeds after that if you want to get fancy. But those are probably the two most important pieces. If, you don't know where to start, you want to take a step back and just start thinking about strategy. That's where I would begin.
Yeah, I would echo that. As starting off with those wins is really, really important. And I've been there, analysis paralysis. I've been there, and especially given my persona, I just go deep into things and do get lost. And I'm guilty of that too. So if you guys have some tricks, please share them too.
Yeah, same. I was just thinking the same thing. Like, I never have a chance to sort of reflect on what's working for the community necessarily. And then when I do, it's like I go way too deep, right? It's like, that one question was a thing, It's like, oh well, let's pull this back a layer.
Yeah. I know that what's been a win for us, even internally, is really focusing on ICP number one, on defining what that is, and then continuing to evolve that. We started this a couple of years ago. We actually started letter grading. That's how we scored our own both contact and account ICP. So as things come in today, whether they're existing or whether they're brand new, there's a behavioral and an actual ICP score that a demographic score that they're assigned. And once this information gets to sales, everything that's happened because of A, what marketing has done, that's already given credit. B, how sales has defined ICP and them working together, there's a grade. So if an SDR gets an A or B, they're like, oh, I already know this is good to go after. I don't have to think about it. Here I go. So helping to define that, I think early on will help as well, because you can build those pieces and tie that back into your attribution modeling and crediting as well. So having a purely defined or a very like at least baseline for ICP is also a good start. So if you don't have that set out, do it. Even if it's only like 3 or 4 points, start little and you can add on to it.
Yeah. I would completely agree. I was in that analysis paralysis mode, and the ICP conversation really helped me too. When I was talking to someone that gave me this direction was, how do I get started? Even when I was looking at this whole engagement journey across accounts, I was talking to them, how do I get started? And very simple example that they shared was that in all of our lead processes, there's something called MQL. Do we know that word? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you stamp your MQLs, look at MQL date times. If you're stamping them, just look at how many MQLs happened in that account for the time frame of that opportunity. That's a very simple analysis. If you see that there were 3 or 4 MQLs that happened during that time of that opportunity was open and was closed, you can tell there were 4 people who influenced, and your MQL already takes into account likely a demographic score and a behavior score. So you're pretty much set there if you take that approach to start off with.
Yeah, and a little bit of work in the beginning, which goes back to your original point. This is how we developed our ICP. We did exactly what you did. We looked at, I think, a year back or so, what was working, right? We said, okay, this is the industry that they're in, this is company size, blah, 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 blah. We developed our initial grading scale. It took a little bit of manual work, but from then, everything was automated and applying credit or applying, basically automating stamping, like what these new leads or what these new accounts should be graded. So a little bit of proactive work in the beginning can lead to a lot less headache, right? Like moving forward, especially if you guys are using technologies, like an OpenPrize or what Harjot's using to sync together and make it a very seamless transition, so that what you eventually end up with is just some nice, pretty reporting that you can go and look at and make some ideas or not ideas, decisions off of versus all this other scary heavy lifting that you're thinking you have to do in the beginning.
Yeah, I think identifying that ideal customer profile in alignment with your sales team is, again, and documenting it, right? And whether you document that on a digital piece of paper, like a Google Doc or what have you, and then eventually move that to a system, a platform that can enable and act upon that decision, can really help with, just sort of moving the needle on where to get started and making what is a pretty overwhelmingly, difficult thing to think about in terms of attribution models, a little bit easier to bite off. Like, I don't remember the full analogy, but, eating a really large cake can be done one bite at a time, right? Not all at once.
Exactly.
Okay, so there was another question in here from Andrew Walker, who says, any tips for what should or should not be used for Marketo program statuses or Salesforce campaign statuses? And to add on to that, do you use a status to denote that a person is influenced? Maybe do you, Harjot? And I'll try to find that and put it up on screen.
Yeah, so I think this goes back to the basic of it, is where you look at a Marketo program, you look at the channels or channel tags that are created, you look at all the program statuses, and there's a concept of success within a program. So when I did my analysis, I looked at all the program successes and did analysis against that, because I considered program success as a measure of engagement. So that's why it's very, very important to lay those foundations to determine what's the success for your channel.
Makes sense. Okay. I want to take a moment. I'm gonna look at this one additional question that I see here in just a second. I do want to take a moment to share with everybody that this is sort of like the Disney vaults that I don't know if any of you remember that. They used to like let things out of the vault, and you used to be able to buy them, and then they would go away after a while. So much like that concept, we do have what we fondly refer to as the no bullshit demo of OpenPrize. So for anybody who wants to go look at that product and try to understand it better, the community has come together to ask OpenPrize to answer 10 core questions that we really care about. So you can make an informed decision on if you actually want to go talk to anybody else at the OpenPrize team. But you can do this in sort of your own time. It is available to you all. I'm posting the link in the chat right now. So you can go check that out. Or you can click the Docs tab in the top right corner and go watch that in your own at your own leisure. It'll answer about 10 questions and hopefully give you a good sense of whether or not they can help you. For all of you that were sort of evaluating new tools in that poll that we ran earlier, might be a good starting point.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. We were stoked that OpenPrize wanted to do that. I take great pride in cutting through the noise of what do these tools actually do for us. So we were glad to have done that with them.
And they can stalk me on LinkedIn too, and then I'll attribute it and give you credit.
See, there we go. All of that. It's a very meta conversation. It's kind of full circle right now. Okay, so Viggy. I apologize for butchering your name just now. You asked me, why do you think MOPS make recommendations to leadership and they're not part of the leadership team? So this is a loaded question for me. I think that we are, as a role and as a function, we're becoming, it's obvious that this function is becoming ever more important to the organization. Evidence be to all of you here learning about this topic with us and talking about these important things. All of the people in the community that continue to grow, right? We're, I don't know, like 2,800 or so folks in Slack, across email, et cetera. It gets even larger. And there are more jobs than there are professionals in this space. So I think one of the reasons why we are making recommendations to leadership versus being a part of the leadership team is that this function has matured over roughly the last decade. And the appreciation for its value and its technical acumen, as well as strategic sort of function, is still developing, right? Being seen as technical folks who really know how to make Marketo awesome or HubSpot awesome or whatever was sort of the initial phase that we all went through. And now we're entering into this phase where there are a group of us who are stepping into, I want to be able to tie back the work that I'm doing to a strategic business function. And we talked about that at the beginning of this session, right? Tying it back to velocity of pipeline and attribution and all those things. And so as you learn to have those conversations with your leadership teams, you will find yourself, marketing ops professionals will find themselves in leadership roles. And so you're not necessarily making recommendations to leadership, but you are actually starting to set the groundwork for what those things could be as a leader.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just want to add one more thing to it, is that I very much echo with what Mike mentioned, that this role very much started as a sort of a technical architect for a marketing organization, or a CIO for a marketing organization managing the systems. But as you think about it, if you look at startups today, the second or third hire is essentially a MOPS hire, not anybody else. That's one testament for it. The second thing you would look at it is that marketing ops is going into more strategic roles of planning, budgeting, marketing analytics, along with data and technology, what it used to manage. So if you go into those areas, or if marketing ops is going into this area, that's directly a leadership role. And that's how it's going to shape up for future for marketing ops leaders, in my perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. We've done sessions on OpsCast about marketing ops being the path to CMO. I think that is absolutely a possibility. I don't know that all of us want to be CMOs necessarily, but it certainly can be one, right? And you can sit at that leadership table and even just be the right-hand person to that C-suite, that CMO role, and really enable them. Yeah, so I want to thank all of you. I want to be respectful of the time. Harjot, Laura, thank you both for joining us and talking through attribution and giving, not taking credit. And for all of you who joined us today and asked all your great questions, thank you so much. Be sure to let OpenPrize know if you want to learn more and come back for our next session. Relatedly, we're going to be doing a session on UTMs in the next couple of weeks. So you'll just join the community. You'll hear about that. Very tied to attribution. So
I remember those.
we're looking forward to that one. All right. Cheers, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.